I'm sure you guys have been on a film set or working with a client in a corporate situation or director or whatever, and you know, they just want to see what you're doing because it's their vision or whatever, like they're, ooh, we're paying you. But seriously, having a director's monitor is super important to having your clients have an easy time to view your work, and it can save you a ton of time watching playback for like every single take. But historically, these systems are not really cheap or even really good value. That's where Shimbol comes in, and they've been doing some really interesting and underrated work in the video accessories game. Tested out their Memory 1 monitor recorder a while back, and eventually they asked if I wanted to test out their recent video transmission systems. So while they did send me these units to play with and to test, that I made it clear that this was going to be an honest review, and they agreed they wanted me to test this out, put it through the paces, and that's what we're gonna do today. This is actually a 2-for-1 video, so buckle up. We've got the Shimbol ZO1000, which is a relatively affordable video transmission system, which comes with a really slick transmission and receiver, which can use HDMI, SDI, USB-C for various functions, and of course is powered by fairly common NPF style batteries. We also have the Shimbol ZO600m, stands for monitor, which is a wireless transmitter monitor combo. Originally, I misread it and thought it was a receiver only, and then I thought it was a transmitter only, but it can actually act as either a transmitter TX signal or a receiver RX signal. What? This kind of blew my mind. I mean, I told other people about it and they were like, yeah, obviously, but it took me a while. Both this and the ZO1000 can send signals to each other in different combinations and to Apple devices like an iPad or an iPhone with an app, which is awesome because, you know, if you're on set with a client, if you have your monitor, great, but they can also just pull up their phone, scan a barcode, and you're good to go, but we'll talk about that later. And as far as I'm aware, according to Shimbol, both of these can be pretty much used with any Shimbol RX TX device interchangeably, so if you've already got some, or if you find cheaper stuff from their back catalog or something, that's pretty cool. So let's unbox this for some first impressions. We got a package. I don't know what it is. That's the thing. I can't imagine how it is for big channels. I don't get sent stuff very often, but when I do, I almost always forget what it is by the time it actually gets here. So today we're gonna find out together. Actually, this is one of the few times you guys probably know what's going on more than me because you've already read the title. Does anybody else just make the cut and then just like rip it open? Okay, we'll be smarter. Ooh, I know what this is. Ooh. One of my cameras didn't work to show you what I unboxed exactly, but when it comes to what's in the actual box, the ZO1000 series comes with 2 transmitters, of course. It comes with the antenna. You actually get 5 in the box, so if you ever lose or break one, since they do attach to store it more easily, you have a backup at least, and there's also a USB-C cable for other operations we'll talk about later. When it comes to the monitor, it's pretty dead simple here. It's pretty much just a box with the monitor in it. Nothing fancy, no mounting points, and of course none of this comes with the NPF batteries required to power it. So let's keep it 100. The build quality on these is kind of a mixed bag. I mean, for the price it makes sense. I loved the metal of the Memory 1, but it's a little heavier and gets pretty hot actually. The plastic on these keeps it a little cheap feeling, but also lightweight. When you're putting this stuff on a camera rig or a gimbal, that's not a bad thing to keep it light, but still the plastic could feel a little bit better quality, but so not the best quality materials, but it's not like a cheap toy or anything either. It's kind of in between. So the monitor is really solid for a screen, but the ZO1000, those little screens, as cool as they look, are definitely a little dim in daylight, and you know, it'll get the job done, but yeah, it's solid for the price, but not amazing, those screens. That's probably the weakest aspect, is the screens on the transmitter and receiver. So I always like to see how easy things are to set up without any instructions or real experience. And the first time setup was pretty simple. I just needed to figure out the whole channel and group thing and all that. I forgot like all my mounting options, so it's obviously super messy. It was at this point I didn't realize how powerful that ZO600m monitor was. I only thought I could transmit, so I definitely got a little confused, but you know, we test out all of those combinations later on. And of course, now we know it can do both. Overall, that first time setup is definitely pretty simple, but I would definitely read the manuals if you aren't familiar with this type of product. It helped me out quite a bit. So how to set things up. Of course, the first thing to do is assemble your cameras, monitors, and transmitters and receivers, and make sure you have enough HDMI cables to set this all up. I think most people are probably going to be using HDMI, but SDI is also an option as well. After that, pop some NPF batteries in and turn everything on. So the big thing here is matching your brand and channel to be the same, and then you can pretty much use this interchangeably. There is a little bit in the manuals about making sure you connect your RX and TX channels before you add a second RX channel, and also just leaving the iOS connection last in line for the whole chain, but you know, that's just something to keep in mind, and it's pretty clear in the manual. So once everything's set up and powered, you can pretty much use this system interchangeably, and that is the true strength, since the monitor can be a RX or TX signal, and obviously the transmitter receiver can be RX and TX too, depending on which one you use. So personally, I think the ZO600M is perfect for like a tripod or handheld setup where a monitor would be useful already, but you might have trouble rigging and powering a separate transmitter. But on the other hand, if you're rocking a gimbal and don't really have place for a monitor, or just want a little receiver and use the screen built into the camera, I can definitely see just putting the ZO1000 transmitter on a gimbal, for example, to keep that weight and balance down. So again, it's nice that you have options. But just to quickly break it down here, when I have the monitor, the ZO600M, I can either transmit to the ZO1000 receiver or an iOS device, or both. If I had a second monitor, like another Z100M, I could also have one set to RX and one to TX, and that would be a really slick setup where I've just got two monitors with one power source each, and both are transmitting directly to each other, and I don't need any additional transmitters and receivers outside of the range being a little bit shorter. That's a pretty appealing setup in my opinion. And then I could have two monitoring systems if I brought out an iPad or something as well. The Z1000 does have a leg up from the monitor, not only in distance at 1,000 instead of 500 meters, but also in device options. It can send an RX, TX, and iOS signal just like before, but it can actually send to two RX devices. So I could send from the ZO1000 to the other ZO1000, or I could send to the ZO1000 and the monitor and an iOS device after that. So yeah, you can have three sources going out from this instead of just two, and the range is a little bit longer, but you know, we'll test that later on, chapter times below. Again, the flexibility of the setup of having all three of these is really, really interesting and can fit into a lot of different shooting scenarios for me. I mean, I wouldn't say the possibilities are endless, but it's cool. So next I'm gonna head out to Papa John's Park and test out the range of these things. So the monitor has a range of about 500, and the dedicated transmitter has a range of about 1,000 feet. So yeah, let's check that out. All right, so we set this whole thing up and someone didn't record. No, not naming any names. But here's what the receiver, and this is gonna go to this monitor once I have this set up on the camera. I didn't bring any kind of like monitor mounts or anything, so I'm just gonna be able to hold both of these, which is gonna be very fun and not awkward at all. And so usually I would have this on top, and this prevents you having to get any additional delay on, you know, running an HDMI to this, and then an HDMI to another monitor or transmitter, and sending it out. This is just straight into the thing, straight out. All right, channel 3, group B. Channel B, group automatic. Let's see if we get anything. Oh, it found it. This battery is extremely low. Oh well, should have charged it. Okay, so you can see that we're on the screen, going to the monitor with the HDMI, and the monitor is transmitting over to the transmitter. So we have a second monitor over here. Okay, this is the worst setup of all time. But yeah, we're testing how far this thing's gonna go. There's Leah back there. So far, so good. It's supposed to be 500 feet. So, the world's worst vlog. Oh God. So my goal here was kind of just to walk around, go between this sculpture and the receiver and just see how far it took to get out of range or to have some kind of image breakup or pixelation. And yeah, it does pixelate after not too long, but for viewing, it's fine, but the recording suffered a little bit. What if I go behind this little tomato? Going behind the tomato. And back on the road. Looks like our tomato was about 200 feet from the bench we started at. And even at 200 feet, we had a pretty good transmission, no real issues, even when there was something in between me and the receiver. So keep in mind, my back was turned, and so I was kind of in between the transmitter and the receiver, but 450 to 500 feet, we're getting some serious breakup. But when I turn around, it actually kind of straightens out. So I would say that that 500 feet range that they advertise is probably pretty accurate. Maybe even, might even be a little bit better than 500 with a clear line of sight. What'd you think of that range? Was that like what you expected, or was that further? Like, how do you feel about like that transmission distance?
Okay, so I expected it to go out by that pumpkin over there.
I called it a tomato, but I think pumpkin's maybe better.
I didn't think it was gonna even make it that far. I thought it was gonna cut off once it got to like that black statue or like the movie.
Yeah, but
so it was pretty good range.
Yeah, especially because this is a screen, a monitor, and a transmitter all in one. So next up, I'm swapping out the ZO600m for the Z1000, the dedicated transmitter. See how that performs. So I have this connected here, and then we've got the monitor, focus, and the phone, which are both extremely dark, but you know, you can get the idea. And we're gonna see which one cuts out first and how far both of these go. Sound good? Mm-hmm. All right. So you think this one's gonna go farther, right? Yeah. But do you think the phone's gonna go farther or less far? I think
less farther.
Yeah. So the phone's gonna be like 250, 500, like the last thing. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's pretty reasonable. Okay. Here we go. I'll see you in a second. So off we go. We'll do the tomato test again as well. So we'll go around to the pump tomato, and see if that affects things. Then we'll head up to the top of the hill, and then if we need to, keep going further. A few things to note before we get into the exact distance these things went was that while there is an image being transmitted, sometimes, especially on the recording, it can get a little bit blocky and pixelated. Also, the cell phone footage is only 720p instead of 1080p, and so it looks worse when the signal is bad, but it actually held up pretty well overall, I think. Sometimes, just because of the pixelation, the phone ended up looking better despite the lower resolution than the 1080p. So I had pretty much gotten right to the point where the last test ended, and I was about to head into new territory. Going up the hill, we're probably 30, 50, maybe a little bit more feet past the original test. Okay, so we're definitely past the 500 feet mark, and we're heading into unknown territory. And as I say that, the video cuts out again, and quite a bit this time. Now, I have to say, my body is in between the transmitter and the receiver, but when I turn around, it does get a little bit better and tries to reconnect, but I would say, yes, 600 feet or something like that might cut off. So I would say, even with the transmitter system, that 500 feet range is your safe space. If you're in like an open field with no metal artwork laying around, you could get more distance for sure, but the electromagnetics in your area and in your shooting situation is probably going to affect you just as much as direct line of sight or things like that. So yeah, I do a little bit more testing and try to get some more range on top of this hill, but there's just too much going on in this park. So with both devices, I would say 400 feet to 600 feet, depending on the device, is safe. Once you get really far past 500, you may have a few issues. I know latency is a big issue for a lot of monitors, a lot of video transmitters, and I wanted to test out the latency between these two devices. I shot this all in 60 frames per second, and I used the S5 Mark II, which has a kind of only like an average, maybe a little bit bad HDMI delay. So at 60 frames a second, that's about 5 frames recorded, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. So First off, we use the ZO1000, and I sent the HDMI signal to the ZO1000 from the S5 II, which went to the ZO1000 receiver, the Z600M in receiver mode, and my iPhone. I also have pretty much every device on the default setting, which is normal, but if you change it to quality or to smooth, you might get more or less quality and latency. So when I clap my hands, comparing the camera screen that you can see in the shot to the other monitors, the connection to the iPhone is actually the best. So when you clap, it looks like there's about an 11 frame delay at 60 frames a second to the phone, which is about 183 milliseconds. Again, that's on top of your HDMI delay. So with a different camera or with SDI, that might be eliminated. So keep that in mind. After that, the ZO1000 receiver added on an additional 3 frames or 14 frames total for a 233 millisecond delay. And finally, the ZO600M had an additional 2 frames for 16 frames per second total or 266 millisecond delay. But again, if you set this into smooth mode for a smooth transmission, that would probably be a little better and a little closer to that 80 milliseconds. Still, I think that's not a bad performance, and that's definitely well under a quarter of a second for sure. Now we switch things up and use the ZO600 as our transmitter. So it looks like right here, there is an HDMI delay of 5 frames out of 60 frames a second, or 83.33 milliseconds, which is how I got that for the previous test. Transmitting from the ZO600M straight to the iPhone adds an additional 3 frames or 8 frames total for a 133 millisecond delay. And to the ZO1000 receiver, there's an additional 7 frames of delay for a total of 15 frames or a 250 millisecond delay. Again, if you factor out the HDMI delay, you'll have 166 millisecond delay. I also tested to see if more or less devices could change the latency, but taking away the iPhone and then the ZO600M and then leaving just the ZO1000 receiver, the delay really didn't change whether 1, 2, or 3 devices were connected, so no need to worry about additional devices making your delay worse.
Let's talk about the Shimbol ZO600M. It's a 5.5-inch monitor, which is great. 7-inch monitors are just too big for me because I use a lot of small DSLM style cameras like the GH6, and it's a solid monitor. It's got custom buttons. It's got really bright backlit screen, 2000 nits, I believe, and it's got pretty much all the same recording features and monitoring features and assist features that I really loved from the Memory One. So if you want a more in-depth breakdown of like the menus, they're pretty much identical from the Memory One, except for, I believe, the RX-TX stuff, which obviously the Memory One doesn't have. The ZO600M comes in at $399, so $400. And obviously you're still gonna need a receiver to go with that as well, unless you just want to send it to your phone. But yeah, you could buy this, have a great monitor. And again, this has an SD card come with it, so you can record inside the monitor as well. It just does so much stuff. It's a transmitter, a receiver, it shoots it off to your phone. You can monitor with every assist tool you can imagine, and you can record the screen onto a memory card, which is kind of handy as well in some situations. I feel like, again, I use it mostly for YouTube stuff and recording like menus and things, but it's still cool. And then the ZO1000 comes in at $499 for the transmitter and receiver combo. So again, if you already have a monitor, or if you are just going to send it to your phone or don't really care about the ZO600M, then yeah, these are a great setup as well. They're a little bit more professional. You can send off 2 signals if you had like a second receiver. And again, you're getting a bit more range, as you can see, maybe not double the range, but still really solid range, really good clarity and everything like that. The delay is not horrible. It's advertised as really good. I've used it on the S5 II. Spoilers, I have the S5 II now, and that camera has a pretty bad HDMI delay, so maybe that was a questionable decision. Whoops. But I saw on the, I believe, Per Gear website, I'll link that below,
if I find it, but it was a combination that included the monitor and a receiver, just a 2-piece combo, which was not a bad deal if you really think the monitor is going to be the way to go. But you know, I'll leave that up to you guys. Obviously, I got both of these things, and that's going to run, you know, was it $800 or $900 combined? That's definitely not super cheap, but compared to some of the like expensive pro options that came before, yeah, I think these have really solid value if you need them for short films. They can save you a ton of time. I mean, I'm not going to say they're going to half the amount of time on set for watching playback and stuff. They're obviously not going to eliminate the entire need for playback on set, but reducing playback by what, a third or half is going to give you more takes, more time on set, and less time watching playback. And for clients on you know, corporate jobs, it's really nice. If you know you've been looking for this sort of thing and you've seen the thing that just like plugs in and goes to your phone, or you've seen stuff from Axoon that's like, okay, it's a transmitter that just goes to Apple devices, those are all cool, but the flexibility for having a professional RxTX signal and the ability to just go to an app on an iOS device, the ability to interchange with the monitor or the receivers or the transmitters, I think the versatility and the flexibility, which is basically the same word, I really think that is what sets this piece of gear apart from some of the others I've either bought with my own money and been a little disappointed in. And that's another thing, like random story, but the Axoon that I bought, I broke the antenna on it, and you know, it still worked, but it's just like, oh, man. And with this, they thought of that and included an extra antenna or two. So, you know, it's still little things like that, but you know, that little stuff can go a long way for sure. But anyway, guys, I would definitely be interested to see what you guys think of these products. Would you use them? Have you used stuff that's better or cheaper or more expensive? Or, you know, does this have a place on professional sets, or is this kind of a middle, low end, you know, sort of thing? I'd be very curious to hear your thoughts down below. And yeah, definitely appreciate you stopping by the channel. Hope your day is going all right. Hope if it's not, it'll get better. I'm sure it will. It always does. And I'll see you guys in the next video.